Hey everyone, this is Alex from Aspect. I'm going to talk to you today about Angular version 20, which has just come out as a release candidate. And that's pretty exciting for me because I used to work on the Angular team back when we were releasing Angular 2. I was the tech lead for Angular CLI. And back at that time, I was showing everyone how to use Angular with Bazel, which is a monorepo build and test system from Google, which handles JavaScript as well as basically every other language. And so today I'm just going to do a quick demo and show you what this thing looks like. And if you've ever looked at Bazel before and thought it looks scary and like it would break all of your workflows, I think you may be surprised to see how much easier things have gotten in the last few years. So let me show my terminal and we'll just do a quick demo here. So I'm going to go to a new directory. Make sure I throw this away when my machine reboots, and I'll run Aspect init. So Aspect is a command line utility from my company and basically wraps Bazel, makes things a little bit easier. And one of these things it does is stamp out a new repository like this. And so it gives you a wizard. I'll call this project Angular 20. This is, of course, a new monorepo that I'm creating that's going to use Bazel. It's going to have JavaScript and TypeScript. I could pick other languages that I intended to use for my backend or other teams. Code generation can be cool. Yeoman is a tool that it can install for us. Formatting and linting, sure. Not going to need to stamp any versions. We're not releasing anything, not releasing any OCI containers. And then the final thing this wants to do is run this post scaffolding hook. So what this is doing is setting up PNPM, which is the package manager we're going to use under Bazel. It's really awesome even without Bazel. It has a content addressable store to make it really fast to reinstall packages that are already on your machine. It also has good behavior that Bazel needs to rely on. So it's just updated the PNPM lock file for us, and you can see it's printed some instructions. There's a README file that it's planted in the directory to help us understand how to use Bazel. And it's also got this thing called Bazel env. Let me show you how that works. So if I cd into this folder, I have something called Duranv that's giving me an error. Duranv is just a general sort of Unixy tool that helps you to set some environment variables when you enter a certain project so you have the right versions of things. And you can see it's saying I should run duranv aloud. So basically say I trust the file in this folder, which looks like it's this .envrc file. So I trust these contents, I put them in here. Then the next error it gave me is it says I should Bazel run, and I'm just going to do what it says. So this is setting up my Bazel environment. So now I'm going to have a development environment in this folder where everything is pinned down to the right versions for all the different tools I might want to use. And you can see it prints all the tools that are here, including PNPM is here. Even the right version of Node.js is available. So I can basically do things in my terminal that are going to use the same versions of tools that will happen to be used later for build and test that Bazel manages. So there's no more works on my machine. If I go to a different folder, I know I have the right versions. And now let's open this in an editor so we can start working on the project. So I'm going to use Windsurf because it's got an AI assistant. And so we'll switch over there. All right, so this is showing us our project structure, a bunch of files, not very important to look through them. One of them that we're going to use here is Module.bazel, which brings in dependencies. These are all called rules. Rules are a way to make a plugin for Bazel. And so one of the things we're going to want to do is use rules Angular. This isn't published on the central registry yet. That's a task that I need to do. So I'm just going to make this version 0 for the moment. And then there's some other Bazel stuff in here that we can mess with later. You can see things like the PNPM version is pinned in this file. And the next thing I want to do is, of course, the tool that we want to run is Angular CLI. So let's look in this tools folder. Bazel has these files called build. We're working on automating this step a little bit more. And then this is going to fetch things from this Package.json that's in this folder. Okay, so this is where we just want to add Angular CLI to get started. And we'll, of course, get this new RC that just came out, which looks like this. OK, now I want to run PNPM install using the version that Bazel's managing. Right? If I do PNPM version, I think it's -- version. Cool. That's the same version we just saw in the module file. There's a PNPM workspace that I'm part of because we're in a monorepo. So it's going to manage all of our NPM packages. And you can see tools is already in this list. So that means if I do PNPM I, I'm expecting Angular CLI is going to get fetched down and installed for me. Now, I want to be able to run that using our tools pattern. So there's two steps. The first is Not quite. We're gonna npm tools, and we're gonna need Angular CLI, which is in our tools folder. This package.json BZL is a representation of the package.json file in a way that Bazel can read. There's a binary in there called ng-bin, and then we need to copy paste one of these lines as well. Like I said, in some future release, we can automate this because we can look at what all the bins are in the things that are installed. Cool, so now I can Bazel run the ng binary, but what we really wanted was for it to be on the path. So that's what this Bazel env thing does, so we'll add that. Now we should be able to just rerun that Bazel env setup thing. Okay, and we got an error because this rules Angular I pointed to isn't in the registry yet, like I said. So we're just gonna do a quick override to grab a version of that from GitHub directly, as one does. So right after that, I'll just stick these lines. This is just pointing to a recent commit. This is from someone on the Angular team. Thanks a bunch for collaborating with me on that. Okay, so now you see ng is now in the list of tools that this thing is managing for us, which means that it's on the path. So if I do ng version, this is going to be managed by Bazel. Great, and it is the RC of Angular 20. So the next step is to create a new Angular JSON, which is like an Angular workspace. I'm going to create something in the front end folder here. So I'll do ng new. And I need to pick a name of a folder. So this is a monorepo, so there will probably be backend stuff in here too. I'm not going to create an application yet, just to save some time, and because we can do that explicitly. I'm also going to skip install because I'm using PNPM. Something about zoneless, I'm just going to pick the default. And of course, now our PNPM workspace, I just created something called front end, so I need to add that here, right? And now I should be able to do PNPM install again. With that added to my workspace, and in the front end folder, we can look in the node modules. We see that we've installed everything for our editor to work. And importantly, here's the new RC. Importantly, what we're showing here is that you don't have to use Bazel in this workspace at all. I am just creating standard Angular stuff, and nobody's forced to change their tooling. They can just interact with these files directly. Okay, the last step is to do ng generate component, library. I'll call it mylib, and again, we can skip the install step. Okay, that's made a folder called projects mylib. So the Angular CLI knows how to generate a whole structure of projects. And again, we'll need to add that front end /project/star, right? And so now whatever is in the new package.json file that this mylib project has been installed in the node modules folder here. Cool. And so the final step is to generate some build files. And the Aspect CLI does have a thing to auto-generate the build files for us. I'm not going to demo that right now because it's missing a couple of things I would want for this demo. So instead, I'll just paste a couple of things from our Bazel examples repo that I encourage you to go check out. There's really only two things we need. The first is in this folder where the Angular JSON file lives, we're going to add this ng config thing that comes from rules Angular. And that's basically just going to grab the Angular JSON and the package JSON, maybe the TS config JSON. It's also going to run some JQ filters just to update a couple fields in there so that behind the scenes, Bazel can see what it needs. But again, and very importantly, I'm not changing any of the files that are checked in here. So everybody who's not using Bazel is still able to do their normal work. The second thing we want is in this mylib folder, we'll make one more build file. This file named build is just what Bazel uses to understand our code. And in here, we're going to put an ng_library. This is going to be a little bit longer. Pasting this again from our Bazel examples repo. Okay, so we don't need this tools thing. You can see we're grabbing ng library and also ng test. We're going to be able to run our karma test in here. There's this thing copy to bin, which copies the sources over to the place where Bazel wants to see them, and then we pass it our node modules. This fix me, yeah, we can actually remove this. This is here because in our Bazel examples repo, we're using remote build execution to parallelize the build and test across a farm of machines, and they need to have a pinned down version of a Chrome that comes from a base image, but since I'm doing this here on my Mac, I'll have all the stuff I need. Now we're ready to just try doing Bazel build to start with, and ... means everything under this folder. And we got some errors, so let's take a look at what those are. Right, so it says it couldn't find a package called Angular, and that's just that I made a mistake here in the copy paste. This is actually front end in this file, and also up here. Let's try that again. I guess I'll close the AI assistant for now since I'm not using it. Okay, next error we got is a visibility problem. Actually, that was also over here, same issue, right? So Bazel is going to manage which target should be able to depend on other targets to prevent a dependency spaghetti from forming inside of a monorepo. One more error is from JQ. Like I mentioned, we're updating a couple of these config files behind the scenes, and unfortunately, these two lines are not actually JSON. That assumes that it's using a special parser that understands comments. JQ doesn't tolerate that. Now we got an error that types node is missing. So that's because the package.json that we were given here doesn't actually declare all the dependencies. Types node is needed in this project. Even if we weren't using Bazel, the thing that's causing this error is that we've chosen to be in a stricter mode for PNPM where I turned hoist equals false. That's requiring all the dependencies to actually be declared, and having a correct dependency graph is the most important part for Bazel to be reliable as an incremental build tool. Okay, now why did that not take effect? So importantly, Bazel reads from the PNPM lock file. And so every time I change the package.json file, I just have to do an install. I could just do lock file only if I wanted, so that Bazel can see the change, right? And Bazel's correctly using whatever was locked. Okay, so now the build succeeds. If I look in this Bazel bin folder where it placed the outputs and look under project mylib, we see a dist folder, and this is exactly the same content that you would have gotten if you built this thing outside of Bazel. And the dist folder is one of the productions that it listed. So the other thing we want to be able to do is run tests. So instead of Bazel build, I'll do Bazel test. Oops. Okay, so you didn't see it. I'm not sharing my window, but there's a Chrome window popping open on the side there. And it failed because GPU process exited because operation not permitted, and that looks scary, but it's actually just the same problem you would have outside of Bazel, which is that I'm using Karma as my tester here in the Angular JSON file, and I need to set the browser to be Chrome headless no sandbox, which is the magic one that turns off some stuff that's failing here. Okay, there we go. Test is passing. And now just to make sure that the test is passing for the reason we expect, let's add a failure here. I don't know what the failure needs to be. Really, anything would work. Maybe I'll say to be falsy. Great. So it's failing as we expect. One more thing to show is that there is a watch mode for Bazel, which we would get if we ran npm, right? So let's say I have some scripts in the package.json file, and one of them is ng test, right? So if I do npm test, and then I need to say which of the projects was created, this is going to not use Bazel, just do the normal thing. It's failing for the reason we expected, which is it should be falsy. But notice it's running in watch mode here, right? So to get the same behavior with Bazel, I'm just going to use iBazel, which is interactive Bazel. We are going to build this into the Aspect CLI pretty soon. So that's the same thing. It's printing an advertisement. It failed. And if I change this back to truthy, all I have to do is save the file, and it retriggers. And now the test is passing. So that's pretty much it. You can get started with Angular 20 using Bazel. Obviously, in here, I could create more things. I could do ng generate application, and then the application can depend on the library. And I would basically do all the same steps that we just showed. And all of that stuff just works without any hand modification of files in here. Now I have an app, and again, I can just paste some simple build content here, and I'm up and running. So that's about as long as I want you to have to sit and watch me and listen to me talk. I'm pretty excited that this is all working again. Come take a look at the Bazel examples repo if you'd like for the finished version of all of this that shows like an application depending on a library using the monorepo path mapping stuff that you would expect with Angular CLI, and it all just works with Bazel. So it gives you the advantage now that you can have gigantic scale using the same build system that Google itself uses. You don't have to do anything weird, and it still works for all of your other developers. Now you have a monorepo that works across languages, and it has all the properties that you would want from a build system like NX, which is like remote caching, remote execution, and a super productive development environment. So thanks for watching. See you again next time.